No one ever looked at her long enough to remember her face. That was the advantage. She moved through the hall of ash like a shadow that knew where it belonged, along the edges, between pillars, beside walls darkened by centuries of smoke and ceremony. Her hands were steady as she carried the trays, though the weight of them bit into her wrists. She had learned long ago how to keep her gaze lowered without seeming afraid, how to pass close to silk and steel and never brush either. Tonight mattered. Everyone could feel it. The hall was fuller than she had ever seen it, packed with nobles, commanders, emissaries from distant territories, whose names she only half knew. Voices layered over one another in careful excitement. Laughter rang too loudly. Every banner had been freshly hung, every torch trimmed to burn clean and bright. The air smelled of polished stone, hot wax, and anticipation. She had helped prepare for this since dawn. She had scrubbed the flagstones until her fingers burned. She had carried wine until her shoulders ached. She had listened to the other servants whisper about what this night meant, about the Dragon King's return, about the choosing, about how history would remember the women who stood at the center of the hall when it happened. She would not be one of them. She stood now near the back, close to a column carved with the worn relief of an ancient battle, waiting for a signal she would never receive. Her dress was plain and serviceable, the color of ash and old linen. It blended into the stone behind her so well that more than one guest nearly stepped into her without noticing. That was fine. That was how she survived. 3 years had taught her that being seen was dangerous. Seen meant questions. Questions led to attention. Attention led to things she could not afford. Expectations, claims, decisions made by people who had never asked what she wanted. So she stayed invisible. At the center of the hall, the space had been cleared. 5 women stood there now, arranged with deliberate precision. Each one was beautiful in a way that felt intentional, curated. Silk and jewels caught the torchlight. Their hair had been braided and adorned. Their backs were straight, their chins lifted, their expressions carefully composed between confidence and humility. They belonged there. The girl by the column shifted her weight slightly, easing the pressure on her feet. The borrowed shoes pinched. They always did. She had taken them from the storage room at the last moment, hoping no one would notice they were half a size too small. No one ever noticed her. The murmur in the hall rose and fell like a tide. She caught fragments as she passed close enough. Speculation about alliances, whispered wagers, old rivalries temporarily masked by smiles. Everyone was waiting for the same thing: the doors. She felt it before she heard it. A subtle tightening in the air, as if the hall itself were drawing a breath. Conversations thinned, laughter faltered. Even the servants paused, instincts honed by years of working in places where power gathered. The great doors at the far end of the hall had not yet opened. She did not look toward them. That was another rule she had learned. Do not look first. Let the important things pass you by. Let them assume you were never part of the moment to begin with. Her fingers tightened briefly around the edge of the tray she carried. The metal was warm from the cups resting on it. She focused on that sensation, grounding herself in something simple and real. This night would end the way all nights did for her. She would clear the tables. She would scrub the stone. She would return to the narrow room assigned to her and sleep until dawn demanded her presence again. Tomorrow, the hall would belong to someone else's story. She was almost relieved by that certainty. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. Heads turned, bodies shifted. The sound of many breaths catching at once swept through the hall. Something had changed. She felt it reach her even at the edges, a pressure at her chest she did not understand. Her hand stilled against the tray. For reasons she could not name, she did not move. Not yet. The torches flared as if stirred by an unseen wind. The banners trembled slightly against the stone. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered a name with reverence edged in fear. She did not turn. She remained where she was, against the wall, half hidden, unseen, unaware that the rules she had lived by for years were already beginning to fail her. And that, for the first time in a very long while, invisibility was about to be taken from her. Chapter 2. When Power Entered the Hall. The doors opened without ceremony. No herald called his name. No voice announced his titles. The sound alone was enough, the low, resonant groan of ancient wood moving against iron, a weight so immense it demanded attention whether one wished to give it or not. Conversation died mid-breath. The hall did not erupt into silence all at once. It unraveled into it. Laughter faltered. Goblets paused halfway to lips. A noblewoman near the dais inhaled sharply and forgot to exhale. Even the torches seemed to burn steadier, their flames pulling inward instead of dancing freely. He entered alone. The Dragon King did not hurry. He did not linger. Each step was measured, unhurried, as though the space ahead of him already belonged to him and always had. His boots struck the stone with a quiet finality that echoed farther than sound should have carried. Black armor traced with dull, fire-etched lines covered him from shoulder to knee, not polished for display, but worn smooth by use. A long cloak followed him, dark and heavy, its edges whispering against the floor like a living thing restrained. His hair was pulled back at the nape of his neck, leaving his face unshadowed, sharp in the torchlight. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of storm-dark embers. Those eyes moved slowly across the hall, not searching, measuring. People reacted without being told to. Backs straightened, spines bowed. A few nobles lowered their heads just enough to signal respect without surrender, a practiced balance that spoke of old power and older fear. Servants froze where they stood, instinct screaming at them to disappear. The girl by the column felt it too, the pressure in her chest deepening, the air growing heavier around her ribs. She shifted back half a step without realizing it, letting the stone take some of her weight. This was not a man who needed to demand space. Space made itself for him. He stopped several paces short of the dais where the 5 women stood waiting, their careful composure strained now, eyes bright with nerves they could no longer hide. The elder council rose as one, gray robes whispering, staffs striking the floor in unison. Still, the Dragon King did not look at them. His gaze continued its slow sweep, taking in banners, sigils, faces, alliances and rivalries laid bare beneath silk and steel. He absorbed it all with the detached focus of someone accustomed to carrying the weight of consequence. At the edges of the hall, servants pressed closer to walls, blending into shadow, including her. She kept her head down, the tray balanced against her hip, her pulse loud in her ears. She did not know why her heart was racing. He had not looked at her. There was no reason for her to feel exposed. And yet, the hall felt smaller now, as if the ceiling had lowered by inches, as if the stone beneath her feet had tightened its grip. She stole a glance despite herself, just a flicker upward, no more than a breath. He was still facing forward, attention fixed on the space before him, on the ritual that waited to unfold. The 5 women stood in stark contrast to the dark line of his armor, their finery luminous beneath the torches. They were the center of this moment. She was not. Relief loosened something in her chest. This was as it should be. Power stayed where it belonged. Stories moved forward without brushing against her life. She looked back down at the tray. Behind her, someone whispered his name, reverent and afraid all at once. Another voice murmured about destiny, about fire and bloodlines and old magic stirring. The Dragon King raised one hand. The gesture was small, The effect was absolute. The elder council fell silent. The hall followed. The choosing was about to begin. And still, his eyes had not found her. Not yet. Chapter 3. The moment she was seen. The silence stretched. It was not the comfortable quiet of ceremony, but something tighter, expectant, coiled. The kind that pressed against the skin and made even the smallest movement feel loud. The Dragon King stood motionless at the foot of the dais. The elder council waited. The 5 women held their positions with practiced grace, though strain had begun to show in the careful lines of their posture. Time slowed in the way it did just before something broke. The girl near the column shifted the tray slightly in her hands. One of the goblets had begun to tremble, the faintest vibration against the metal. She adjusted her grip, willing it to still. Her breath felt shallow, caught somewhere high in her chest, though she could not have said why. Then it happened. It was not sudden. There was no sharp turn of his head, no dramatic pause that announced itself to the room. His gaze drifted, not toward the dais, not toward the council. It slid past them, past the banners and torchlight and polished armor, moving with the same deliberate calm he had carried since entering the hall. As if something, somewhere, had pulled at his attention without asking permission. The air changed. She felt it before she understood it. A tightening just behind her sternum, a strange warmth blooming where there had been nothing but nerves. Her fingers curled reflexively against the edge of the tray. No. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of the moment. The weight of being surrounded by power that had nothing to do with her. But his eyes kept moving. Across the crowd. Along the edges. Toward the back of the hall. Toward her. The instant his gaze reached the shadowed space where she stood, the world seemed to tilt. It was not the sharp snap of being caught doing something wrong. It was worse. Quieter. Like standing still and realizing the ground beneath you had begun to shift. His focus sharpened. The noise of the hall faded, not vanished but dulled, as if sound itself had drawn back in deference. The banners no longer stirred. The torches burned steady and low. The Dragon King stopped breathing. Not visibly. No one else would have noticed. But something in the set of his shoulders changed. The smallest adjustment that spoke of attention pulled inward, of instinct overriding ceremony. She felt it like a thread drawn suddenly taut between them. Her pulse stuttered. Heat flared beneath her skin, unfamiliar and unsettling. She lowered her gaze at once, heart pounding hard enough to make her lightheaded. Do not look. Do not move. Do not exist. The rules that had kept her safe for years screamed at her to disappear. But the pressure did not ease. If anything, it deepened. She risked another glance, just enough to confirm what her body already knew. He was looking directly at her, not through her, not past her, at her. The distance between them stretched the length of the hall, yet it felt suddenly meaningless. His eyes, dark, intent, unreadable, held her with a weight that made her breath catch. There was no heat in them. No hunger. No anger. Only recognition. As if he had found something he had not known he was missing. The tray slipped an inch in her hands. Metal rang softly against metal as a goblet struck its neighbor. The sound was tiny. In the silence, it might as well have been a shout. Several heads turned. A servant nearby glanced at her in brief irritation, already forgetting her a heartbeat later. But the Dragon King did not look away. His gaze narrowed, not in suspicion, but in focus. His jaw tightened. One hand flexed slowly at his side, fingers curling as though resisting the urge to reach for something unseen. The thread in her chest pulled again, harder this time. Her breath came fast and shallow. She had the sudden, terrifying certainty that if she did not look away now, something irreversible would happen. She dropped her eyes to the floor. Stone. Dust. The hem of her dress. Anything but him. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the weight of his attention shifted. Not gone, but restrained. As if he had deliberately turned his focus back to the ritual before him. The hall exhaled. Murmurs crept cautiously back into the air. The elder council straightened. One of the women on the dais released a breath she had been holding too long. The choosing resumed. But the girl by the column stood very still, her heart racing, her hands trembling despite her efforts to calm them. She did not know what had just passed between them, only that something had seen her, and that nothing would be the same again. Chapter 4. A Choice. Made in silence. The elder council stepped forward at last. The eldest among them raised her staff, its carved head catching the torchlight. Her voice carried easily through the hall, practiced and ceremonial, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "The moment has come," she said. "The Dragon King may now choose." A hush fell again, sharper this time, edged with anticipation. The 5 women at the center of the hall straightened in unison. Each one was composed to perfection, though nerves flickered beneath the surface. They had been trained for this, prepared, chosen long before this night ever arrived. This was where the story was supposed to end for everyone else. The Dragon King did not move. He stood at the foot of the dais, gaze fixed forward, expression unreadable. Seconds passed. Then more. The silence stretched thin enough to make people shift uncomfortably. At the back of the hall, the girl pressed her shoulder lightly against the stone column behind her, grounding herself. Whatever had happened moments ago had surely passed. It had to have. Kings did not upend centuries of tradition because of a servant standing in the shadows. She told herself that again. Then he turned away from the dais. The movement was unhurried, controlled, final. A ripple of shock moved through the hall, audible this time. Gasps, murmurs, the soft rustle of silk as bodies leaned forward in disbelief. The 5 women froze, their careful composure cracking as confusion flickered across their faces. The Dragon King stepped down from the dais. One step, then another. Not toward the council, not toward the doors. He walked past the first row of nobles without a glance, past commanders and emissaries whose names carried weight in every corner of the realm. The space before him opened instinctively, people stepping aside as though moved by an invisible force. The girl's heart slammed against her ribs. No. She glanced behind her, a sharp, instinctive check. Certain there must be someone else, someone important standing just beyond her line of sight. But there was only stone and shadow and the faded carving of a long-dead battle. She turned back. He was closer now. The hall seemed impossibly quiet, the sound of his boots against the stone floor unnaturally loud. Each step closed a distance she had never imagined could belong to her. Her breath hitched. Her hands tightened around the tray until her fingers ached. Stop, she wanted to think. Stop looking this way. He did not stop. He came to a halt a few paces in front of her, close enough that she could see the fine lines etched into his armor, close enough that the weight of his presence pressed warm and steady against her skin, close enough that the thread in her chest pulled tight, humming with a quiet insistence that made her knees threaten to give way. The Dragon King looked at her fully now. Not with surprise, not with doubt, with certainty. The hall held its breath. "I have made my choice," he said. His voice was calm, unraised, and it carried to every corner of the room. A stunned silence followed, thick and absolute. He did not gesture toward the dais. He did not turn back to the council. He remained exactly where he was, in front of her. Whispers broke out like sparks catching dry tinder. Disbelief, outrage, shock. The words overlapped, climbing over one another as people struggled to reconcile what they were seeing. The girl stood frozen, her mind blank. This was impossible. This was a mistake. Kings did not choose servants. Stories did not bend like this. She took a half step back without realizing it, instinct screaming at her to retreat, to make space, to disappear before the weight of the moment crushed her. His hand lifted, not to touch her, not to stop her, but to still the room. She did not step forward, he said evenly. I stepped toward her. The words landed like a quiet rebuke. The elder council stared in open disbelief. One of the women on the dais swayed, steadied by another's hand. Somewhere in the hall, a noble protested under his breath. The Dragon King did not look away from the girl. You are not required to answer, he continued, his voice lower now, meant only for her. You are not required to move. The pressure in her chest eased just enough for her to draw a shaky breath. The hall erupted again, voices rising in protest and confusion, but she heard none of it. All she could feel was the steady presence before her, anchoring her in a moment that had already torn her life open. The choice had been made, publicly, irrevocably, and for the first time in her life, she stood at the center of a story she had never been allowed to imagine herself in. Chapter 5. The choice returned. The noise of the hall swelled, voices colliding as disbelief turned to argument. The elder council conferred in sharp, urgent murmurs. Nobles leaned toward one another, faces tight with calculation. Somewhere behind her, a servant whispered her name in stunned recognition. The girl heard none of it. The Dragon King shifted, just enough to place himself between her and the crowd. Not as a shield raised in challenge, but as a presence that quietly absorbed the weight pressing toward her. The space around them felt steadier for it, the air less sharp. He did not touch her. That absence mattered. You don't have to stay here, he said, his voice low, meant only for her. You don't have to answer anyone, not tonight. Her throat felt too tight to speak. She nodded once, a small movement she hoped he would understand. He did. If you want to leave, he continued, calm and unhurried, I will have an escort take you somewhere safe. If you want to stand here, I will stand with you. And if you want time, his gaze held hers, steady and unpressing. You will have it. The pressure in her chest eased, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding finally releasing. Choice settled back into her hands like something returned after being misplaced for years. I didn't mean to, she began, then stopped. The words tangled. Apologies were an old habit, reflexive and worn thin. He shook his head once. You did nothing wrong. The certainty in his tone made something inside her ache. A sharp voice cut through the murmurs. This is highly irregular. The Dragon King turned his head toward the council, expression unchanged. So is ignoring what stands before us. He did not raise his voice. He did not elaborate. He simply remained where he was, unyielding in his stillness. Then, just as deliberately, he turned back to her. Look at me, he said, not as a command, but an invitation. She did. Up close, the storm-dark intensity she had glimpsed from afar softened into something else entirely. Focus, yes. Power, undeniably. But beneath it, restraint. Care held tightly in check. I will not decide for you, he said. Whatever comes next will be because you chose it. Her fingers loosened around the tray. She realized dimly that she was still holding it, knuckles white with strain. Before she could think better of it, she lowered it to the floor at her side. The small act felt monumental. I just need a moment, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. A corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close. Take all the moments you need. He gestured subtly, and the space around them widened as if the hall itself had listened. Guards moved, not toward her, but outward, creating distance. The noise dulled again, pushed back by an invisible line no one dared cross. For the first time since the doors had opened, since the world had tilted on its axis, she felt steady enough to breathe. Whatever this was, whatever he had seen in her, it was not a trap. And that, more than anything else, made her brave enough to remain where she stood. Chapter 6. The Cost of Being Chosen. The moment did not last. It never did. Whispers that had been held at bay began to surge again. Sharper now, edged with anger and disbelief. The hall filled with tension that crackled beneath the torchlight, no longer contained by shock alone. Tradition had been bent. That meant consequences. A noble stepped forward first, a tall man in deep crimson, his sigil stitched in gold across his chest. His smile was polite, but his eyes were cold. "This choice carries implications," he said smoothly, addressing the Dragon King while pointedly not looking at her. "Alliances were promised. Territories have gathered here in good faith." Others followed, voices layering in careful agreement. Talk of bloodlines, of balance, of precedent stretching back centuries. Each word tightened the knot in her chest. She had known this would happen. Being seen had always come at a price. The Dragon King listened without interruption. His expression remained calm, but she felt the shift beside him, a subtle tightening, a readiness she could not yet name. When the voices finally fell into uneasy silence, he spoke. "My decision stands. Simple. Final." The murmurs surged again, louder this time. An elder raised her staff, knuckles pale with tension. "Then we must address what this decision means," she said. "The woman you have chosen holds no title, no recorded lineage, no political standing. Her presence beside you will invite challenge." The words struck closer to truth than insult. She swallowed, fingers curling at her sides. This was the part she had feared. Not the anger, not the attention, but the way people reduced her to absence. No title, no standing. As if she were a gap in the world rather than someone who had survived it. "I know," the Dragon King said. His gaze remained forward, but his voice softened slightly. "And I accept what follows." That was when she realized, truly realized, that this choice cost him something. Not abstract disapproval. Not whispers behind silk sleeves. Power. Several nobles exchanged sharp looks. One of the women from the dais turned away, her face pale. A commander near the edge of the hall frowned openly, calculating what this shift meant for his loyalties. The structure of the realm was adjusting around her like stone grinding against stone. A new voice cut through the noise, quieter but no less dangerous. "Then let her be examined." The words came from the council's far end, spoken with practiced neutrality. "If she is to stand beside the Dragon King, we must know what she is, what blood she carries, what magic." The girl stiffened. Her instincts flared, old and sharp. Examination was never just examination, it was exposure, stripping away privacy until nothing remained but what others decided was useful. The Dragon King's hand lifted slightly, not toward her, but in warning. "She will not be treated as an object," he said. "Not by you, not by anyone." The elder hesitated. "Then how do you propose—" "I propose," he interrupted calmly, "that we adjourn." Outrage rippled through the hall. Tonight was supposed to end with ceremony, with celebration, with certainty. Instead, it teetered on the edge of fracture. The Dragon King turned to her then, finally acknowledging the strain in her posture, the way she held herself too tightly, as though bracing for impact. "This is where the world begins to push back," he said quietly. "I won't pretend otherwise." Her heart pounded. "I don't want to cause trouble." He met her eyes. "You didn't." Then, after a beat, But trouble will come anyway. Not as a threat, as truth. Around them, alliances shifted, resentment sharpened, and somewhere beyond the hall's walls, forces older and less forgiving than politics stirred in response to a choice that had never been meant to exist. She stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer protected by the shadows. And for the first time, she understood that being chosen was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of the cost. Chapter 7. When she spoke for herself. The council chamber reconvened at dawn, not by tradition, but by necessity. The hall was smaller than the great ceremonial space, its stone walls carved close and high, designed for voices that carried weight rather than spectacle. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, cutting pale lines across the floor. The banners had been removed. This room did not care for display. She stood just inside the threshold, hands folded carefully before her. This time, she was not hiding. The Dragon King stood beside her, not ahead, not behind. Close enough that she felt his presence like a steady current, but far enough that no one could mistake whose voice was meant to be heard. The elders took their seats. Nobles filled the edges of the chamber, murmuring softly. Some watched her with open skepticism, others with thinly veiled resentment. A few with something like curiosity, sharp and appraising. She breathed through it. 3 years of being overlooked had taught her how to stand without drawing attention. But standing like this, seen, scrutinized, required something else entirely. The eldest elder spoke first. "Before this council proceeds," she said, gaze fixed on the Dragon King, "the woman must be heard." The words were measured, formal, but they landed like a test. The Dragon King did not answer. He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. Not a command, a question. Her pulse beat hard in her ears. For a moment, the instinct to step back surged, strong and familiar. Let him speak. Let him decide. Let power handle power. She swallowed. No. If she stood beside him, truly beside him, then this had to be hers. She stepped forward. The movement was small. It changed everything. "I know what you see when you look at me," she said. Her voice was steady, quieter than the room, but clear enough to carry. "You see someone without title, without family worth recording, without the marks that make a person valuable in rooms like this." A few nobles shifted, uncomfortable. She did not look at them. She kept her gaze on the council. "I have survived by staying out of sight," she continued, "by working, by listening, by learning which stones are loose beneath your feet and which doors open if you push at the right moment." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "I did not ask to be chosen," she said, "and I will not ask to be excused." Silence fell. She felt it then, a subtle shift at her side, not interference, support. The Dragon King remained exactly where he was, his attention fully on her, his stillness a quiet declaration. "If my presence here is a threat," she went on, "then it is because your systems cannot account for people like me. That is not my failing." Her hands trembled. She did not let them drop. "You fear what I represent," she said softly, "not because I am weak, but because I am unmeasured." The elder's grip tightened on her staff. "I am not asking for your approval," she finished. "I am asking for the same thing any citizen of this realm is owed." She lifted her chin. "To be judged by my actions." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the eldest elder exhaled slowly. "You are bold," she said, "to speak so plainly in this chamber." "I've learned," the girl replied, "that silence only protects those already comfortable." A faint, dangerous smile flickered across the elder's face. Respect edged with warning. The Dragon King turned his head then, addressing the council at last. "You have heard her." There was no triumph in his voice, only certainty. Whatever decision followed, it would no longer be about what had been taken from her, or given to her without consent. She had stepped into the story with her own voice, and no one in that room would ever forget it. Chapter 8. What the bond truly meant. They did not name it at first. Not in the council chamber, not in the corridors thick with listening ears. Whatever had stirred the night before was treated carefully, like a flame that could either warm or burn depending on how close one stood. It was later, when the castle had settled into uneasy quiet, that the truth found words. She stood on the balcony outside the Dragon King's private study, the stone still cool beneath her palms. Below, the mountains stretched into shadow, their peaks outlined in silver by the rising moon. The air smelled faintly of ash and rain. He joined her without announcing himself. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I should have told you sooner," he said. She didn't turn. "I didn't know there was anything to tell." "There was," he replied softly. "I just wasn't certain how to speak of it without taking something from you." That made her look at him. He wasn't wearing his armor now. The weight of command had been set aside with it, leaving behind a man who looked, if not uncertain, then careful in a way she hadn't seen before. "When I entered the hall," he continued, "I felt the bond before I saw you." Her breath caught. "A bond?" "Yes." He paused. "Not the kind sung about in ceremony, not a chain, not a claim." He searched her face, as if gauging whether to go on. "It is recognition," he said at last, "and answering. Something old that awakens when two people meet who change each other." The words settled slowly, like snow. She frowned. "Then why did it feel so sudden?" "Because it is rare," he answered, "and because it does not wait for permission." Something in her chest tightened. "Does it take choice away?" "No." The answer came instantly. "If it did, I would have walked away from you in the hall, no matter the cost." She studied him for a long moment, weighing truth against instinct. "And the cost?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "The bond magnifies," he said. "Strength, loyalty, fear. If you stand beside me, those who already resent my rule will sharpen their knives. If you walk away, it will weaken me, but it will be my choice to bear." The honesty in that admission surprised her. "So either way," she said slowly, "there's a price." "Yes." She looked back out at the mountains, at the vastness of a world that suddenly felt very small and very heavy all at once. "I don't feel controlled," she said after a moment. "I feel aware." His shoulders eased just slightly. "That's how I knew," he said. "The bond does not demand. It listens." She turned toward him fully now. "And if I say no?" "Then nothing changes," he replied, "except that I will spend the rest of my life knowing what it is to be truly seen, and choosing to respect the fact that you did not ask for that weight." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable this time. The thread she had felt since the hall, warm, steady, undeniable, hummed softly in her chest, not pulling, not pushing, waiting. She took a breath. "I don't know what I'll choose yet," she said. He inclined his head. "Then we will wait." For the first time since her invisibility had been stripped away, she felt no urgency to decide. Only the quiet certainty that whatever this bond was, it would not take her voice from her. And that knowledge mattered more than magic ever could. Chapter 9. Where Trust Became Intimacy. The choice did not come all at once. It unfolded quietly, in the hours that followed, through shared silences, through the way the castle seemed less hostile when she walked its corridors beside him, through the absence of pressure where she had learned to expect it. They spoke little at first. Words felt unnecessary, even fragile. Instead, they learned the shape of each other's presence. the steadiness of his attention, the way he never crowded her space, never assumed closeness he had not been offered, the way she found herself drifting nearer without realizing it, drawn by something that felt less like desire and more like alignment. It was evening again when she finally stopped running from the truth of it. They stood near the hearth in his private chambers, firelight casting slow-moving shadows across the stone walls. Outside, the wind moved through the mountain passes, distant and low. "You're still here," he said quietly. "I know." She met his gaze. "So are you." A hint of something like relief crossed his face. He did not reach for her. He did not move at all. "I need to know," she said, voice steady despite the pulse thrumming beneath her skin. "If this is something I step into, you won't expect me to disappear into your life." "I won't," he said without hesitation. "I would rather stand beside you than have you stand behind me." The words settled deep, warm and anchoring. She took the final step herself. The distance between them closed not with urgency, but with intention. She lifted her hand slowly, giving him time, giving herself time to stop. When her fingers brushed his coat, he inhaled sharply but did not move. "Is this all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, rough and honest. "Only if it's what you want." She nodded once and let her hand rest there, over his heart. It beat strong and steady beneath her palm. When he finally touched her, it was careful. His hand warm against her back, fingers splayed as if memorizing where she was real. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of recognition finally allowed to surface. She leaned in. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory. No claim, no rush. Just the quiet press of lips that had waited long enough to know patience mattered. When she exhaled against his mouth, something in him softened, and the bond between them responded, not flaring, not burning, but deepening, like a note settling into harmony. She felt it then, not as magic demanding obedience, but as warmth spreading through her chest, steady and sure. He drew back slightly, forehead resting against hers. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "I won't," she said, "but I will tell you if I need to slow down." His mouth curved, just barely. "Then we're agreed." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in firelight and quiet understanding. When he kissed her again, it was with more certainty, still restrained, still listening. Nothing was taken. Everything was offered. And for the first time, intimacy did not feel like surrender. It felt like choosing to remain. Chapter 10. A Future Not Yet. Written morning arrived without announcement. It did not break the night apart with light or color. It simply eased into the castle, thinning the shadows, softening the edges of stone and flame. The storm of voices that had followed her choice had faded to a distant hush, like breath released after long restraint. She woke to quiet, not the fragile quiet of fear, but the steady kind that felt earned. For a moment she lay still, listening. Somewhere beyond the walls, the mountains breathed. The castle settled around her, ancient and watchful. She had spent years learning how to disappear inside places like this. Now, she was awake within it. Beside her, the Dragon King stirred, not as a ruler rising to command the day, but as a man adjusting to the presence of someone who had changed the shape of his world. His arm rested across her waist, heavy and warm, a reminder not of possession, but of promise. She did not move away. When he opened his eyes, the storm-dark intensity she had seen in the hall was gone. What remained was quieter, more dangerous, perhaps, in its honesty. "You're still here," he murmured. "So are you," she replied. A faint smile touched his mouth, soft, unguarded. He pressed his forehead briefly to her temple, a gesture so small it felt like a secret. Outside their chamber, the realm was already shifting. She could feel it, even without seeing it. Messengers would be riding, councils would be forming, old alliances would be tested by the choice he had made, and the choice she had not yet finished making. She turned toward him. They won't let this rest. No, he agreed. They won't. And the bond? She asked quietly. It will draw attention. Yes. The truth settled between them without weight. No fear, no urgency, just clarity. She sat up, drawing the cover around her shoulders, and looked toward the window where the morning light gathered. I don't know what comes next, she said. He watched her carefully. Neither do I. That mattered. I won't promise you safety, he continued. Only honesty, and the space to choose again. Every day, if you need it. She considered that. The years she had spent invisible. The moment she had stepped forward. The way her voice had carried when she let it. Then we'll face it as it comes, she said. Not because the world expects it, but because we decide to. Something in his expression shifted. Relief, respect, something deeper still. He reached for her hand, slow and deliberate, waiting until her fingers closed around his. Beyond the castle walls, the realm waited. Old powers would rise to challenge them. New dangers would take shape in response to a bond that refused to remain quiet. And somewhere in the distance, forces older than crowns and councils had begun to take notice. But for now, in the pale light of morning, she remained where she had chosen to be. Seen, unclaimed, and ready for whatever the story demanded next.